You're starting to record from the get-go, Chris?
I think it was just set up that way.
Okay.
I know we wanted to record presentation, right?
Right.
Yeah, you're right.
And
If that's what we want to do, sure.
because what I'm thinking is we want to have Jeff's presentation as a standalone, so we could put that on the website. And I
Yeah.
was thinking I was gonna ask people to hold off on questions, so
Yeah.
let Jeff make his presentation, and then we can do questions following his presentation. And then we could pick and choose those questions if we want to have them on the website or not.
I think that's a good approach.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey, Jody. The sun is shining in Boston, so I feel as though I should be running out there just to see what it looks like.
It's pretty nice here in Dover.
That looks really nice.
I think I heard you saying, Robin, something about some questions if we think about using this recording later on as part of our
Right.
education. Did I hear that when I was coming in?
Yep.
Yeah.
So
I
my
wonder-
thought is as follows, Jody, to ask Jeff to make his presentation
Yeah.
and have people hold off on questions so that we can record Jeff's presentation and use it as an education piece. And then, then we can have a conversation, ask questions, and then we could see if we want to use the questions and conversation as part of the education piece, or if we want to write something up.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. The one thing I can't remember, do we have a Zoom recording somewhere that is just more generically, because I noticed, hi Jeff, I noticed in the presentation that, it assumes background knowledge about MBTAs, which is totally appropriate for this meeting. But I'm just wondering, do we have a video? Can't remember, do we have a recording of a meeting where we talk about sort of what is the MBTA Communities Act, the sort of 30,000 foot?
There was a presentation on that to the selectmen a while ago, and I can't remember whether we gave it or Jeff gave it.
Jeff,
We could find that one.
I think we should at least look at it because I think this is going to be incredibly important. But I think for a lot of people, the 30,000 foot one is going to be important too. And in the draft sort of schedule of educational topics that we're probably going to need to build, Jasmine and I have been working on that. I think what is also important. But not
Yeah, I did provide the town with slides that included all of that background information.
Right,
I eliminated it from today's.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
For purposes, but those slides are available.
So they are available, and we could think about what to do with them. Maybe, we could even just record this is what it is. That's not a full meeting.
Yeah, because there are other resources and tools out there that other groups have recorded that talk about what it is generally. If you feel like that message would be better received if someone from Dover recorded it, Yeah.
So actually, I think the last meeting or right before the meeting, Jasmine sent around the original presentation that Jeff did, which was more of an overview of the MBTA.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Carol, I
just
saw that, you sent about the Medfield newsletter, and I thought the language in there was very good. I mean, some of it not related, certainly the hospital complex, but just the way they talk about it, I thought was very good.
Right. So I agree with Jeff, maybe we take some of that and we use some of his slides and,
Yeah.
and we ourselves put together the Dover.
Yeah,
I mean you and Jasmine, but
the proverbial way.
yeah, the proverbial we.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have the,
Walter, maybe you want to
have a-
be part of it, I don't know.
yeah, maybe we have a pretty good working, some ideas about various elements of the educational plan about housing broadly and specifically with MBTA. And so I think Jasmine, we'll talk offline. I don't know if you've made any additional progress since that original one I sent you, but we can talk about how to get these various videos going. Because I do think, MBTA 101 is one thing, and then MBTA for Dover is another.
And also, we've been sort of tag teaming with CHAPA. CHAPA has developed a lot of slides and materials.
What's CHAPA, Jeff?
Oh,
That's
you're going to ask me to
housing.
remember an acronym. It's one of the major housing advocacy organizations in the state, and they have also been providing grants to. So the grant that Dover got is more about the technical assistance for how to use the compliance model. CHAPA has been the group working with MHP to help provide resources for these community conversations and more, changing hearts and minds.
Yeah, I think one thing about using an organization like that for our 101 videos, I think there's a lot of content we can use. I just feel like people assume then that there's a motivation behind. You know what I mean?
If you wanted to mine their resources for your own purposes, there's a lot of stuff that they've created.
We can take it. Yeah, we're not going to start from scratch.
So CHAPA's, I Googled it, Citizens Housing and Planning Association.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm in the middle of day 3 of a 3-day charrette in Somerville and Medford, where we're trying to figure out zoning for a corridor that splits between the two towns.
Wow.
And my brain is kind of fried. So I apologize. Right now I'm with just my little laptop in someone's conference room in Somerville City Hall.
Boy, there's
Jeff,
a lot
can I just ask you quickly? You had mentioned sending slides over. Is that something you sent recently, or is that the slides that Jasmine had shared previously?
I don't know what Jasmine shared with you. I had originally sent some slides that again have more of the background information, then I resent the slides without
background.
I
will find that for you.
Yeah, because I don't recall getting those either. But
it might be that was it the ones that we used for the presentation to the select board? Let's see.
So there was initially the slides I pulled together for the select board that and sent that to you a few months ago, and then and I've got, of course, the slide deck up, and I'm ready to go through it with you all today.
So this like, I think Jasmine sent out slides to me. Did it go to Jody as well on the 20th? Jasmine?
For this meeting, Carol?
Yep.
Yeah, that's the slides we're talking about that we're going to look at today.
Yeah.
We're wondering about a more sort of what is MBTA group of slides, because I know we have that.
Yeah, that's from the original presentation to the selectmen a while ago.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know where that is. Maybe Jasmine can.
We can all find them at some point.
Yeah. Okay.
So we
you can't find them.
get,
I can resend them to you. Obviously.
Thank you, Jeff.
which is probably operator error, I did not get slides from the 20th.
They're the slides that Jasmine sent out that we're going to be reviewing today.
I just resent them so everybody will have them. I just sent them to everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So Jeff, in the interest of time, I think this is everybody that's
Okay,
gonna
great.
be here today. So what I thought we would do is have you give the presentation so that we can record this portion without interruption. And
Okay.
then we'll hold our questions. And unless somebody has an extremely good question to ask in the middle, that would be helpful. And we could hold our questions until after. And then have a conversation, and then we'll decide what to do with those, with the questions. So we really as a group really appreciate you making the time today to make this presentation to us. We basically formed this task force to try and assist the town of Dover blend a couple of things. First of all, the education on multifamily housing, the different types of multifamily housing that exist, trying to blend the town's desire to maintain its rural character, but still be compliant with some of these new rules and regulations, and understand, what we may need to do with our zoning laws to be able to blend those two the two things that the town is looking for.
Yep.
So we thought a great start would be, and a huge component of this is education. And with everything that's going on in Milton, there's a lot of misinformation around the
Oh,
MBTA
true.
Communities Act. So we thought it would be great for us, given that this group understands the fundamentals, for you to just come back and give us an update on what's going on and where we stand. And I understand the good news is we're going to be able to use you through September, so that's great, because we certainly have a lot of work left as we try and navigate this uncertain landscape.
All right. Well, if everyone is ready, I can attempt to share my screen and pull up the slides. Post-disabled participant screen sharing.
Chris can fix that.
So also, if any of you want to share your screen instead, I can just say next slide.
Here, try it again.
Okay. Great. No, that's not what I want to share just yet. Can you move? A minute. Oh, cooperate with me, please. Sorry, I'm gonna stop, share, and try this again.
I think that's the project you're working on now.
Exactly. Exactly. Let's see. Do full screen. This is so much more difficult on my little laptop when I don't have my three
Chris,
screens.
could you or Mike share the screen, and Jeff can just tell you to move forward?
Why is that not showing?
Yeah, I can do that. Just let me
Thank
find
you.
the slides.
Actually, that would be amazing. I don't know why this is. How many million times have I done this? I don't seem to get it to work.
Isn't this always the way it goes?
Always, always. Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. So you can move on to the next slide. So again, just as a bit of background, my name is Jeff Davis with the Horsley Witten Group. We're based in Sandwich, Massachusetts. I am in our Providence, Rhode Island office. And as a reminder to everyone, I am here through some free technical assistance being provided to MBTA communities through a grant from the Massachusetts Housing Partnership. So we've been working with 8 different communities across the Commonwealth on their MBTA community requirements. Next slide, please. All right, so the goals for today. We want to review the potential MBTA communities district sites that Horsley Witten has explored for Dover so far. There are 5 of those sites. We want to discuss the pros and cons of each of those, and ideally reach a consensus today as to a preferred site. So once you have a preferred site, Horsley Witten will then rerun the compliance model as necessary and help you draft a zoning framework for a proposed MBTA communities district. As I've been explaining to Jasmine, if the conclusions we reach as a group are rather simple and straightforward, it's possible I could give you precise zoning language. Some of the overlays have been very simple. If you're landing on something a little more complex, I will provide a zoning framework that will guide you towards drafting the zoning amendments. And again, for this evening, we are taking all that background information about the MBTA communities law as read. Next slide, please. So want to remind everyone about the target specific to Dover. Dover is considered an adjacent small town, which means you have the lowest thresholds, the lowest requirements among the MBTA communities. So your minimum multifamily housing unit capacity is 102 units, and that is derived from 5% of your 2020 housing stock. So again, as a reminder to folks, this does not mean that you need to build 102 units. It does not mean that any existing housing units count towards your 102 units. This is simply your zoning has to, in theory, allow for this if you assumed a blank slate in the district. There is no minimum land area for Dover. This area can be as large or as small as you want, so long as you can hit the number of units and at least 15 units per acre, and that is consistent for all MBTA communities. There's also no location requirement. This can be located anywhere in the town that you would like. And of course, your compliance deadline is next December, not this coming December, but December of 2025. Next slide, please. So I thought it was important to leave this slide in just as a reminder to everyone when the state is saying multifamily housing, what does that mean? So that does not only mean a large apartment complex. It means a building with 3 or more residential dwelling units or 2 or more buildings on the same lot with more than 1 residential dwelling unit in each building. So there are a whole range of smaller scale multifamily from 3 families, 4 units, small 6-unit apartments that would all count as multifamily housing. So in the small town context of Dover, it really is those smaller scale multifamily models that you're more than likely looking for. Next slide, please. All right, so what is Horsley Witten hired to do to help you? First of all, to determine the district boundaries. And again, this is what we've been doing a lot of work with over the last many months to determine where multifamily residential might be appropriate. And again, no minimum size required for Dover, but if the area is less than 5 acres, the entire district must be contiguous. And so far, most of the districts we've been looking at are contiguous and of that size or greater. Determine dimensional requirements. So after we've determined where you want your district to be, we need to discuss how tall should it be, what should the setbacks be, what should be the density. Again, if you want to go beyond the 15 units per acre. So the compliance model iterations that we've done for the town so far all make assumptions about dimensional requirements. I think, as you'll see moving forward, the good news for you is even at very conservative dimensional requirement assumptions, generally we've been able to get you to hit the targets. Step 3, ensure that all zoning policy for the district complies with the law. So there are a lot of aspects of the law that are not reflected in the compliance model. So even if you come out looking golden with the compliance model, there are issues around affordable housing, around limiting the size of units, or the number of bedrooms, and so forth, that would make you not in compliance with the law. So we just need to make sure that all the policies are in line with the law. And finally, sorry, that should be step 4, not step 3. We need to enter this data into the compliance model, test it one final time, and help you find the scenario that first and foremost meets the town's needs, but also complies with state law. Next slide, please. So wanted to dive into some of the properties that the town asked us to look into. There were 4 altogether. They were all existing or proposed 40B developments. And I will pause here to make a little caveat statement about 40B developments. What used to be DHCD and is now Housing and Livable Communities, or HLC, has said that they're not going to release a blanket policy about 40B developments in an MBTA communities zone. They're going to be looking at those on a case-by-case basis. The assumption is that a community that uses solely 40B land in its MBTA communities district would be frowned upon. No one has said it would be rejected out of hand, but it's something to be mindful of. That might be a concern. I am hopeful that HLC will take more kindly to 40Bs in small towns, and particularly here where you're a small town and adjacent, where you don't have a transit station within your boundaries, than they would in other communities. But that is just a caveat as we discuss these properties. So in the blue is the existing county court 40B development, and in the red adjacent to it is Red Robin Pastures, which is a proposed 40B. Next slide, please. We looked at 2 others near town center, the Meadows, which is in green on the left side of the screen, and Dover Farms in pink on the right-hand side of the screen. And these are, again, both 40Bs, but they are, they consist of, I think, exclusively of single-family homes, whereas County Court has multifamily. Next slide, please. So we looked at dimensional standards for these areas that would be plugged into the compliance model. Obviously, multifamily is allowed by right because that's one of the pillars of the law. We set the minimum lot area at 20,000 square feet, 5,000 square feet at Dover Farms because you have much smaller individual lots for the individual single-family homes. Maximum lot coverage at 20%, which is a very conservative number. 50% at Dover Homes, again, given the different density there. Maximum building height, we set at 3 stories for County Court and Red Robin, and only 2 stories at Dover Farms and the Meadows. And of course, another one of the pillars of the law, everything is set at 15 dwelling units per acre. Next slide, please. In terms of setbacks, again, rather conservative. We assumed a 40-foot front yard setback, 25 feet to the side and the rear. We assumed 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit. And again, a very aggressive 50% minimum open space, 20% at Dover Farms, for all the reasons I've stated previously. And in terms of units per lot or per building, we have no limit in this iteration, but we could consider no more than 3 units per lot or building in Dover Farms and the Meadows, just because of the single family nature. I don't know how residents would feel there if all of a sudden you said you can by right build an apartment building in the middle of your neighborhood. Next slide, please. So based on those dimensional requirement assumptions, we ran the compliance model for all 4 of those areas together. The district area is 24 acres. Again, that's just FYI, you have no minimum. The modeled unit capacity was 373 units, well above the 102 units required. You hit your 15.6 dwelling units per acre, again, above the requirement. And you have no requirement for land use within the station area or nor unit capacity. So in that respect, all the targets are hit under this scenario. Next slide, please. However, as your consultant, I would strongly encourage you not to use those two single-family 40Bs as your districts. Again, just thinking about, the whole point of this is that multifamily housing would be allowed by rights at a certain density, and I just don't know that that would fit into the character of those single-family neighborhoods. So, given that opinion on my part, I looked at County Court and Red Robin separately. So County Court by itself, 10 acres, 149 unit capacity. And again, this is not taking into consideration what's actually there today, but merely what you would allow with zoning. And you hit your 15 dwelling units per acre that way. Red Robin, we're calculating 3.8 acres. The modeled unit capacity is 57, so not enough to do this by itself. And the dwelling units per acre is 15.5. So it is interesting that County Court, it's all the targets on its own. Again, the caveat about how HLC will feel about a district that is solely made up of 40Bs. But if you had County Court by itself, it technically meets the requirements. If you added Red Robin, you would just bolster that. But again, you have the issue of them both being 40Bs. Next slide, please. We did the same test for the Meadows and Dover Farms. If taken together with a limit of 3 units per lot or building, these two areas meet the unit capacity, but not the units per acre. So again, we ran the numbers for this based on the results and based on the fact they're existing single family home neighborhoods. We continue to suggest that you not pursue those two. Next slide, please. So after reviewing those and recognizing that the 40B issue, you might want an alternative, we were asked to look at this property on Junction Street. And I'm sorry, I did make some changes to these slides. It looked like they weren't circulated. So these are not, I don't believe, owned by Pulte Homes, but they are exploring development on these parcels. Next slide, please. So we applied, again, rather conservative dimensional standards to these properties. 20,000 square foot minimum lot area, 30% maximum lot coverage, 2 stories of building height, and again, set no cap on the maximum residential density, and assume that other issues like lot coverage, building height, your parking requirements and whatnot will ultimately determine the residential density. Next slide. Again, rather conservative setbacks, 40 feet in the front, 25 in the yard side in the rear. Again, maintaining that 2 spaces per dwelling unit, and requiring 40% of the lot to be minimum open space. Next slide, please. So the results for the Junction Street area based on these dimensional requirements, you do hit your 17.2, sorry, 15.3 dwelling units per acre. So you hit that. Your modeled unit capacity is 214. So no problem hitting that. The district area is 17.2 acres. Again, not that matters for you, and the other targets are not applicable. So it does look like you could easily meet all your requirements with this property. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, obviously there are a lot of ways to play with the model. If you are unsatisfied with any of the dimensional requirements, we can play with them and see what else happens. So for example, rather than capping the height at 2 stories. You could consider increasing it to 3 stories and see if that allows you to increase your open space requirement or decrease the maximum lot coverage. So there are a number of ways to slice this. It wasn't difficult to hit the targets, so there are definitely ways that we can play with this and still hit your targets. And yeah, I really just wanted to reiterate that compared to most other communities, you have a pretty low bar and a lot of flexibility. Next slide, please. All right, so next steps, again, after we come to a conclusion on which area you want to be your preferred area, and we've tested that in the model, then you would be either creating an overlay zoning district or a new baseline zoning district over one or more of those 40 Bs that were explored. If you choose to do that, if that is your preferred scenario, it's been really difficult to get HLC to respond to anything. I've encouraged several communities to do basically a pre-submission to get informal feedback before they submit formally. And it's just taking forever to get responses back. But nevertheless, you have time. If you choose to go this route, I would float this by HLC sooner than later to see how they might respond to the 40B only approach. Second, we can create an overlay zoning district, or again, a new baseline zoning district over the Junction Street properties. And like I said, even very conservative dimensional standards should allow you to hit your targets. And then you're also not dealing with the uncertainty about 40B. And then third, you could certainly identify other properties that might be appropriate, and we can test additional options. I know there had been, I'm trying to remember the name of the property. There's a nonprofit that owns a great deal of land in the town. And there's been some preliminary discussion about exploring something there. The only caveat would be, by December 2025, the zoning has to be set, and if there are difficult conversations to have with that property owner and things to get negotiated, that would have to be pretty clear cut in order for HLC to accept your zoning there. I think that may be the last slide. Next slide. Yep, and here we are at discussion. So that's my summary of what we've done so far, and hope we can see what your preferences are as a committee moving forward. I say feel free to stop sharing the slides unless anyone wanted to go back and see any of those numbers. Janet.
So Jeff, just to clarify, does the act itself require a 40% open space minimum?
Not at all. You are
Okay.
utterly flexible to do whatever you want in that regard. I was showing that to demonstrate that you could have even a very large percentage of open space requirement and still meet your targets.
Okay, and then just to follow up, I just want to make sure I get this straight, that we have several 40Bs already developed.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking at them for this new zoning overlay. The numbers you presented would be additional new units within those areas.
No.
So we
let
can
me try
back.
to describe this again.
Okay.
that your target, your unit capacity target, has nothing to do with what's already built or what might be built in the future. It's not actually counting physical units. It is just what menu does zoning allow? Does zoning allow you to, in theory, once you divide up the land by the expected density, how many units could you theoretically get? But it's not requiring you to build any more units. It is not taking already built units into consideration.
So I guess
that's a difficult one for a lot of people to comprehend, but you're not actually required to build any more housing here.
Okay, so I guess that's good news. That takes some pressure off, but it is counterintuitive to, isn't one of the goals of the act to provide new multifamily and presumptively affordable housing?
Affordable housing, not so much.
Right.
So to answer that question first, the main goal is to build more housing near transit. And the main crux of that, and that's why the standards are written the way they were, you have much higher expectations for communities to actually have transit stations, and they're much lower for those of you who are adjacent. And the hope is that if you have zoning that allows multifamily of a certain density by right, that is more likely to get built in the future. And I think that's one of the reasons HLC is being kind of cagey about what they'll approve and what they won't approve for already built 40Bs, because odds are, if that's where you put the zone, you're not going to see anything different here for any time soon, right? Those houses are probably going to remain the way they are for the foreseeable future. But that's the way the law is written. And so yeah, there will be some communities where you see a lot of change and some communities where you won't see much change at all for a while. And
Okay,
in terms of the
thank you.
affordable housing, it's actually, you're not allowed to have more than 10% affordable housing without a special study. So this is more about housing production than it is about housing affordability.
And I think it couldn't exceed 20%. So you could get a special study over 10, but it's not to exceed 20. So it's
Correct.
really more about dense housing development close
Correct.
to commuter rails.
Jody.
Oh, thanks, Jeff. This is super helpful. Just a question. You mentioned the Junction Street property. You said you could have an overlay zoning district or a new baseline zoning district. Can you explain the difference? You're saying literally put a new district in our
In your zoning ordinance or your zoning bylaw, yes. So you can either say, because right now you don't have any zoning districts where multifamily is allowed. You have to go through other processes to do that. So you could draw a boundary around this area and say this is a new zoning district, and within this zoning district, here's what's allowed. Most communities have been, if they don't have an existing zoning district that they want to amend, most communities are doing an overlay where all the other standards for development continue to apply. But if you're building multifamily housing within this overlay district, here are the rules that apply for that.
So it's like an option, becomes an option.
Yes.
So Jeff, just to extend that thought for a moment. So if we were to do an overlay district on Junction property, and then somebody bought the property and put up a single family home, can they do that?
Yep.
And once they do, does that mean that it becomes even less likely that we would ever build MBTA communities multifamily housing because the overlay district is already populated on a practical standpoint? Okay.
Unless somebody else bought it, knocked it down, and started again.
Right.
Yes, right.
Okay.
But again, the state is indifferent to that so long as the zoning allows it. And if the property owner chooses to do something different with it that you also allow, that's fine.
But Jeff, once it's an overlay district, that designation remains in perpetuity.
Yeah, unless you rescinded it for some reason. So the property owner would always have the right to come back to you and say, all right, we've had the single family home and now I would like to build multifamily housing here. And that would still be allowed by right. But if they chose to do something else with the property that was also allowed, that's fine.
And under the MBTA Communities Act, the town's responsibility is to designate an overlay area or overlay areas that would meet the compliance with that standard, period.
An overlay or a baseline zone. There just has to be some zoning district.
Okay, so can you just explain to me what's a baseline zoning?
So for example, and I don't remember off the top of my head what the different zoning categories you have today, but most communities will have like a residential 1, a residential 2, a commercial, an industrial, and those zones tell a property owner what they can and can't do within that zoning district, what uses are allowed, what the dimensional requirements are for development there. So an overlay zone, wherever your property is, the base zone, your residential, your commercial, and what have you, would continue to apply. You're just adding additional standards on top of that.
Okay. And I guess the key takeaway between 40B development and this MBTA Communities Act is 40B, there are variances to your zoning regulations that developers are entitled to. Whereas with this MBTA overlay district, those regulations still apply.
Exactly.
However, they've been amended for multifamily development.
Right.
Well,
So they have to allow
amended.
multifamily development at that density, but
Right.
all your other zoning standards can and will apply. Whereas,
Like,
yes,
for example, water and septic.
yes,
Setbacks, things like
Setbacks, height, lot coverage,
that. Right,
exactly.
however we define it for that district.
right.
And
So-
my analysis, and okay, I'll call you in 1 second. My analysis showed that, with the Junction Street properties, you could set very conservative dimensional requirements in your zoning that they would have to comply with and still meet the standards. Kate.
So it seems to me there's kind of a paradox in thinking about the Junction Street properties, because if the town bylaws regarding septic systems are govern this area as they would with the model that you're talking about, my sense is, and this is really speaking off the cuff, but it's such a wet area that it would be very hard to put in enough enough septic systems or enough of a septic system to handle large numbers of people. Jason, I don't know how you feel about that, but we haven't done any testing there yet, right? Have we, Jason? But it's so wet.
No, I haven't been out there at all.
So, but let's say it's very wet, and that you couldn't, even though you could zone for multifamily housing, you couldn't put in enough septic systems that worked to support those buildings. Then the option would be, from a practical perspective, to put in a septic treatment plant, such as we have at Dover Farms and the regional school, and a county court has many different septic systems because the property allows for that. But I'm not even sure that I can articulate this, but isn't it kind of a ruse? If, and I don't mean to use that word, but sort of a ruse if you say, well, this area is all zoned for multifamily, but our septic bylaws don't allow for it. So you haven't really created anything that's viable.
And the state has thought about that in particular, and we've actually clear guidance back on that issue. And the guidance has been, we're more interested in zoning today, and if utilities and environmental conditions won't allow for the density required by law, we'll take what we can get based on the utilities that you have today. And if at some future point technology improves and we're able to do more, then super, we'll do more, but we'll take what we can get. So they have made it very clear that it is okay to limit development based on your utility capacity. It's okay to limit development based on these environmental factors. I mean, that is why the state went through and basically did a series of mapping about constraints. And they're like, all right, these are the lands that we really care about. And if you're trying to put, your MBTA communities district here where we see very clear environmental constraints, those constrained areas are not going to count towards your land area. So all the calculations we did, what the state's not going to count has already been eliminated. So for things that might have other challenges, but are not on their list of constraints, municipalities are in theory free to designate those areas and say, we can't do it today, but maybe someday in the future we'll be able to do it. And again, I think they're giving more leeway to smaller communities like you are, would say a larger community where there are clearly other options that would not be so constrained. Whereas, you in Dover have far fewer options. So I see where you're getting at, and it can sound disingenuous to cite something in a place where you can't meet the state's requirements, but given your limited options here, I'm hoping that the state will be more open to that here than in other places. Jody.
Well,
Oh, sorry, Jake.
And in reality, most of our town has problems like that.
Exactly. Exactly.
There are all the easy septic systems to be built in Dover have been built. It's
Exactly.
all very challenging.
So yes, in theory, and again, we haven't seen many rulings because most of the smaller towns have not submitted their zoning yet. But to date, the state has been very clear about saying, yeah, we know that utility capacity and environmental constraints are real. Sorry, Jody, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. Thinking back to Tisdale, the Tisdale option, how I know we have the unknown about the 40Bs, so let's pretend that's resolved, but obviously there's some septic and water over there that was allowed through the 40B process. If you have an overlay district, this is like a wonky question, and let's imagine that down the road, some builder comes in and wants to buy all those homes and knock them all down and start fresh with MBTA housing. Do the underlying utilities have to start from scratch as well?
That completely depends on what's being proposed, and if what's being proposed has, if the existing infrastructure has the capacity to serve it. Because you could certainly design something that was like, I can't imagine that the capacity is absolutely maxed out on those systems today.
Well, I'm just saying, like, say for example, in Tisdale, certain septic situations or water had got variances, right? Because that's the nature of 40B. Would those variances carry over? But I think that would be a question I would ask if I was evaluating this, I would say, oh, well, they already got the variance once because we had to give it to some extent. How do you think about that moving forward? I think that's a nuance about the 40B overlay that would be interesting to understand more.
That is interesting, and I think it's a practical thing for the town to have an answer prepared for some future date. It should not impact state approval of your district there.
Yeah, I'm thinking more about it from the town perspective. Somebody like, hey, that would be a workaround.
Right. So that's something we'd have to give more thought to. I don't have an answer to that off the top of my head.
Janet, you had your hand up at one point. Are you all set?
Yeah, I'm all set. I was just gonna mirror Kay's concern about the viability of a lot like Pulte, which is they do have their environmental delineation, their wetlands permit, and half the site is wetlands. And then you have an additional 50-foot no disturbance, 70 feet no structure. So if it weren't to be a 40B, about 3/4 of the site could not be built on, except for exceptional waivers. So if you redistrict that under the act, knowing that as a public record, isn't that disingenuous? I don't know.
Well, I think I'm fairly certain, again, I apologize, it's been a while since we ran the compliance model for that, but I'm fairly certain that we eliminated all the wetlands and we were just looking at the developable portion of those properties in our calculations.
It would probably be worthwhile, Carol, and I don't know if you would agree or not, but to rerun that compliance model, given that we now know the delineation.
Well, I agree with Jeff. I believe that we had given you the final mapping. Jasmine,
Yeah,
you're nodding as well. I believe after Janet Concom had done their thing, and that there had been agreement between your consultant and their wetlands consultant with the new lines, that new map had been given to Jeff to run. Jasmine, is that correct?
That is correct. I can find the
Yeah.
date for you in just a moment, but we did run the compliance model
Yeah.
with the wetlands on the site.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah. I'm not sure if there have been any updates since then, but yeah, what we calculated for you should reflect that.
Yep.
So we're not disingenuous.
No. I mean, again, this is reflecting what you've already said. Yes, we can build on this area. My goodness, if you were assuming that whole land acreage could be redeveloped, you'd have even higher numbers. And then, yeah, that would probably start to raise red flags. But I think what we've calculated is very reasonable.
And it's not 100-story building with 1 unit per story.
No, I mean, again, we were assuming a 2-story maximum.
Okay, it was a joke.
Yeah.
Not a good one, but.
And again, even if you ultimately end up allowing something taller in this district, you know, you can allow the 2-story by right and, ask for things in return for going taller than that, for example. That's what a lot of communities have done. Like if you can say, well, I can hit my MBTA community's targets with these very, low heights, and the developer comes in and says, well, I would like to go up to 4 stories. And you can say, well, fine, you can do that, but we're going to put a special permit on it and you're going to give us X, Y, and Z in return. So long as by right, they can do something that meets state law. If you want to go above and beyond that, you can condition that however you want. Yes, Kay.
I'm still thinking about this this issue about these lots like the Pulte area that have so much wetlands or have high groundwater or whatever it may be. It seems to me that so many properties in Dover would have trouble with this, that no matter where we were to pick an area for rezoning, it would be very hard to build there, given our current bylaws. And what's funny is that this makes it very hard to grasp this concept of what the MBTA Communities Act is designed to address, because it's, even if we're compliant, we're still not able really to address effectively the issue for Dover to increase housing density. We just don't have given that we don't have the infrastructure, it's very hard to figure out where we would put places.
Yeah, and I think honestly, that's exactly why the state instituted these policies around utility capacity and environmental capacity, because they know there are communities that are severely constrained in that way, and they wanted to give you an out. Or at least that.
I read something in a publication, Commonwealth Beacon, this week about the fact that there is a movement afoot to extend the MWRA services in 3 directions from Boston, but including a Metro West expansion. And a number of communities were named in this, the towns were named in it that are being considered for this expansion. Dover was not among them. I was personally relieved to see that. given that how I feel about the rural character in this town, but I was astonished not to. Sherburne was included, as were a number of others. Is this something that is you're familiar with? I had never heard of this concept before reading this piece.
Of the expansion?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the system is considering expansion all the time, and the law is written in a way that if a new transit station is built in your community or adjacent to your community, then that would trigger within a certain time frame you becoming an MBTA community as well. And it works the other way as well. So for example, I'm working with Beverly and they've got a station that's closing. So that station closing changes their requirements. So yeah, the law was written in a way that the MBTA number of MBTA communities would change as the transit infrastructure expanded or contracted.
I'm sorry if I misspoke, but what I was reading about was the MWRA.
Oh, the MWR. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And that expansion of that may really be what changes the housing picture in places.
Oh, absolutely.
But
of course, that's still up to each municipality, whether you have, I mean, if you have the infrastructure and you choose not to use it, you know, you do not have to densify just because your utility capacity is expanded.
Right, and I think it's important to understand that there is no water delivery infrastructure in the town of Dover. And adding that is somewhere around 150 to $200 million. So you can get water from the MWRA. There is no way to connect that water to anything because we don't have a delivery system.
Sure.
So
So
it
if they
becomes
did
a
have
much-
plans, we're talking massive amount of money and decades of
Right,
infrastructure.
so it's a
development.
much larger issue for our town. It's a much bigger decision.
So perhaps we can sort of move on to next ups and how we proceed with Jeff.
Yes, so I mean, ideally would love some direction today if there's a site that you think has the most potential. And certainly there's nothing stopping you, and other communities have done this, from selecting 2 sites and having 2 non-contiguous areas. So if you said, you know what, we want to include County Court and Red Robin as one district, and we want to include Junction Street as a second district. And that way you've got your 40B and all the certainties of that and the existing infrastructure. But you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. That is certainly a valid option as well.
So
I'm
so,
curious how many communities would over comply. Like I
Not
think
many.
2 would be a
I know that'd probably be a hard sell for your community.
I'm not sure I really want to go down that road, but I see your point. I mean, maybe it would, but if we did that, say we did is it Tisdale? It's called Tisdale, I think.
Yeah,
If
Tisdale's the street. Yeah.
Okay, if we did that plus Junction, we'd be well over the requirements.
Yes, because both by themselves meet the exceed the requirements.
I mean,
And we
I
can
think-
always do one and then add another one later.
Right. But I think there is risk involved with County Court, which is Tisdale, because we don't know whether the state would rule that that's an acceptable MBTA overlay district.
But we could maybe try it, and then if we got an early, maybe they're waiting for us to actually deliver.
So,
our
you know,
proposal.
my concern is we have less than 2% affordable housing in the town of Dover. If we're the town going to the Commonwealth asking for it, is there a higher probability that it's going to be denied? Whereas if another town who is compliant, you know, I think with Junction Street, the fear really is the unknown. What is this gonna look like? So if you could sketch out what a potential development might look like, maybe it's not that bad because, you know, maybe there's a way to put something there that helps us think outside of the box, complies with the MBTA community requirements, but also blends open space. You know, we already know there's so much wetlands over there that you have to get creative with what you're going to build.
Also, to your point, Robin, a thing I like about it is that one of the things we've heard a lot from residents is that they're looking, I think we have to be very careful not to use the term affordable, because that means something very specific. And that's not what the MBTA is about, but it does give us as a town options for smaller units that come in at a lower price point, not necessarily what the state considers affordable. And that's meaningful, you know, to people who want to live in this town, but wouldn't necessarily be applicants for affordable housing.
I mean, you take a look at property like County Court, where those townhouses, okay, hadn't been on the market long. Might be changing now with Red Robin too, but they were very sought after in Dover because they were at a significantly lower price point and they were smaller. They were a good place not only for families coming into Dover, but for downsizing of current single-family home owners in Dover. So something of a townhouse type development on the Junction Street property might be very appealing and very marketable.
Cool.
Yep. Right. You know, if you go over to Medfield and you take a look near the Kingsbury Club, there's these small townhouses. They're all under $1 million. And the minute you see a for sale sign up, it's sold. I mean, and that's an extremely attractive community. And, you know, I looked at the floor plans and it's single story living, garage space on the rail trail. But that's another story.
One thing at a time.
Right. But, you know, something like that, I think would be extremely appealing, especially if you have a second house somewhere. You know, it's perfect.
Other residents.
Yeah. Janet, you had a comment?
I just think we need to keep in mind that given the environmental constraints on Pulte, it is highly unlikely that a developer could come in with a viable project that would not be a 40B. So with this 40B uncertainty, whether that would be allowed, I think we just need to keep that in mind.
No.
Well, yes, but again, there's nothing in the MBTA Communities Act that actually requires development.
So if we're not regulated to having to pick an overlay district in one location, it could be done in several different locations. And I think because of the nature of Dover, septic system wells, we may have to go that way because of the restrictions that are imposed by the environment here. So, you know, I don't think we should try and just look at one area. We keep going back to Junction Street. I don't know that, you know, that one selection of an overlay is going to solve anything.
Well, I guess the question is, what are we trying to solve?
Exactly.
So I think what the planning board is trying to solve, okay, and the selectmen are trying to solve is the legal requirement that by December 31 of 2025, we have zoned an area that meets the model that Jeff has been working on, that falls under the regulations of the MBTA Communities Act, which clearly states, here are the requirements. And oh, by the way, to the point that we've been discussing for the last hour, it doesn't necessarily ever have to be built or could be built, right? So we keep going back in our conversations to, but it can't be built over here. Well, guess what? The MBTA doesn't matter. I think the second part of this task force, you know, as Robin laid out in the very first meeting, was to look at a more comprehensive view of housing in Dover in general. And in that kind of conversation, if we were to say we wanted to diversify the type of housing that we have, then you really get into the practical aspect of zoning areas where you could practically build a different type of housing units. But that's not what this is.
It
So
could be.
It could be.
It could be. You know, one selectman suggested I take my 10 acres and zone it overlay it as a MBTA district, right? So yes, it could be. But I think we as a group have to decide how we want to handle the legal issue at hand, which is MBTA communities, with the consultant that we have, thank goodness, for another 6 months and $14,000 or so worth. And use that to the best of our ability to meet what we're going to know is a town meeting in 2025.
Yeah, well said. That basically sums it up.
And we also know you have to be compliant. If you're not compliant, the governor has stated that she will not provide funding and may not even provide funding for schools. So there's a huge risk not being compliant. And to Carol's point, if you pick Junction Street now and look at it, we know that county court complies. So we have that. We don't have to make an ultimate decision till December 2025 of where our overlay district is. But we need to look at something other than a 40B. And, Junction Street right now meets all the other criteria, whether or not anything that meets all of the MBTA Community Act compliance gets built, it doesn't matter.
I mean, honestly, what I would recommend is that I can help you work on a pre-application submission for county court. We get that into HLC as soon as possible and ask them for an advisory opinion on that approach. I mean, fortunately, given that you're not until December 2025, you've got some time, and hopefully, they'll get through this initial backlog and we'll be able to start getting answers from them soon. In the meantime, I would encourage you to take some more time as a group to think about, all right, what is likely to be allowed. Like, I was using the latest numbers from your discussions with Pulte for my analysis. I'm hearing from Janet that maybe nothing can actually be built there, but let's get a better sense of, okay, well, what could be built there, so that we're using realistic numbers, right? That assume there's not going to be a 40B there. And what could that look like, and what would the community be comfortable with? I mean, you may be able to have your cake and eat it too, and come up with a design and something that you're comfortable with that provides housing alternatives for the community in a way that works for you. I would think almost no matter what you do with that piece, I can probably make it work in the compliance model, so long as I know that you're comfortable with where things are at with that. So that would be my recommendation. Like, let's get something turned in for pre-advice for county court, and in the meantime, work on something that you're comfortable with for Junction. And then if they come back and say no, or if they come back and say yes, or come back and say maybe, at least you've got another card in your pocket.
So Jeff, I love that suggestion, especially the second half about working on putting together a more definitive design and the regulatory the bylaw, the subsequent bylaw requirements for Junction Street. To the point that Robin made earlier this afternoon about Dover leading the charge on whether a 40B can be double dipped. I'm not sure that that's the best approach. So
I mean,
not,
from a
not,
PR
not not only are we under 3%, but we've just denied a 40B. That's probably going to go up to land court or mass housing. So I'm just not, we've got the Dover Amendment that has has a name on it for a reason.
Yeah.
It is particularly a positive implication. So I just wonder whether we can wait and see what happens in the 40B situation with other towns while we proceed on Junction Street.
That's my vote.
Okay.
You know, I'm sure, or even look to see, you know, are there other, you know, we know Junction Street is an option. So just see if you know, work through what that might look like, and because I am really nervous about Dover being the first city to go to land court.
I couldn't tell if Kay or Janet raised your hands first, so you can battle it out.
Janet, you were first. Janet, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to voice a concern that with Red Robin 2 starting up and a very engaged and concerned Tisdale Court residents, that even a preliminary submittal for county court, I just want to voice a concern whether or not we disclose that, or this is so preliminary we don't have to, but I just thought I should bring that up in the interest of avoiding any PR problems. I know Michael's fielding all those calls. He doesn't want any more.
No, I think that's an excellent point where we would be adding salt to a wound.
Shall I go ahead? First, I just want to clarify something. So the zoning, the rezoning that would have to be done would have to go to town meeting.
Yes.
So that's really a deadline for us. That's sooner than December 31st next year.
Well, you could
Yeah,
have
I
a
mean,
special
ideally-
town meeting.
Could have a special town meeting. That's true. The status of Pulte is that it's still owned by it's a series of lots that are owned by multiple people. Isn't that right? It's not owned by any one developer at this point.
To our knowledge, I don't know, Jasmine, if you had a chance to check the registry.
The registry still appears to be single, not one entity. They're all still individual owners.
And I believe it's the same owner, right?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
so that hasn't changed. I asked Jasmine to check on that yesterday because that was an issue.
But it's not a business. It's a person. It's
And it's clearly a person who has interest in selling the property for development.
You could make the case that person might welcome an overlay district.
Yes.
Probably.
And how much cooperation from the property owner is required for something like this? I mean, I'm sure most of these districts are multiple property owners, and it's not this would be a single owner, but how much engagement of residents in the area of these overlay districts is
That's a big,
ideal?
yeah.
I mean, it depends on, every community is different. It's what do you think it would take to get this to pass at town meeting? And, for some,
Ideally, neighbors support it.
Yeah.
In a perfect world.
I think it's most important is citizens need to understand what happens if you're not compliant.
I was thinking also, as we were talking earlier about sketching a drawing of
What it could look.
what it could look like. But I think in a way that would be defeating. It might defeat this, because we're not really talking about something that could possibly be built. You could get a three-story apartment building in that area.
But you could maybe get what was it called? Small scale multifamily,
Right.
even if it was not the density that the law wants, but you could get anything in there potentially.
Well,
Right.
you
I mean,
could-
to
not-
that,
not
to that
necessarily-
point, to that point, any of the 40Bs that we've looked at, you'd have to have every single owner of of Dover Meadows or of the Meadows or Dover Farms or County Court willing to sell their home to a
Right.
developer.
Yeah.
Right.
Which becomes even less likely.
Right.
Or they could individually choose to split their homes up into 3 or 4 units apiece.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, theoretically, they could do that.
I think Kay, the point here is just because the law says you have to have 102, you can have up to 102 units as an overlay district. If you choose to put 20 single family houses on it, small ones, you can do that. You do not have to maximize, but it does allow you to put more than 3 family homes on it.
However, Robin, just to clarify, the overlay district would allow by right multifamily.
Yes.
Right.
So it's not an overlay district where somebody could build 10 single family mansions because they want to. And also, even whatever multifamily scenarios say.
Oh, I thought Jeff said you could do whatever you want, but the right always exists.
Right, because
Well,
it
it depends
depends on
on
the
which-
underlying district.
Right. So if you went with
Right.
an overlay zone and the overlay zone said, this only applies to applications for multifamily development, as opposed to someone who wanted to come in and build,
Right.
6 single family homes when the underlying zoning would only allow 2. It depends on how you write the zoning. But I would imagine we tailor it so that it would only apply to multifamily.
So
Or
would
you could go back to what the underlying zoning allows, which, if that's 2 single family home parcels, then that's what it is.
But
So I just think that it's
is
important.
the definition of multifamily, does it have to be attached? Like, could it be
You could
like
have multiple,
20 freestanding, like the development near Kingsbury Club? All of those units are freestanding, but they're right next door to each other. It looks like a condominium complex.
Yeah.
right. So to go back to the definition that the state has, it either has to be a single building with 3 or more residential units, or 2 or more buildings on the same lot with more than 1 residential unit in each building. So you could have not a bunch of small single family homes, but you could have a bunch of 2 families on
Okay.
a lot, and
The
that would count.
duplexes next to each other.
Duplexes next to each other on the same lot would count.
So you could have all the garages attached, basically.
Right, something like
Sure.
that.
So
I
I,
also think just from citizen perspective and without taking any stance on it as a group, I mean, you could make the case that an overlay district at the junction area is a defensive measure against a 40B application.
I think so. It's an alternative that doesn't exist today.
Exactly.
Right. And if you find out what it is they're trying to accomplish and you think that you can come to an agreement, then we can write zoning that
Right.
meets that, and then they'd have to follow that. They're satisfied and they won't be encouraged to go the 40B route.
Right.
Right, it's another tool, basically, because right now you have single family homes based upon whatever the district is laid out for, or a 40B. So this could be better than a 40B, and it could help diversify our housing stock.
It doesn't help us on affordability, but it does
It's
help.
not.
Right. But
mean-
maybe then Mass Housing will look upon us more favorably, because at least we've done something to diversify our housing stock.
And from a community standpoint, we have diversified our housing stock. It's why we started with the ADU bylaw. It's
Right.
why county court is so
Popular.
has been so popular. and we are providing a lower cost, different type of housing option. And if we wanted to, we could go with the anywhere between the 10 and 20% affordable, right?
Right.
Yep. Okay.
I want to say that I think it would be useful soon to try to take a look at the environmental issues and how much or how many septic systems could be put in this area, in the Pulte area on Junction Street, because we could then back into a sense of how many units could realistically be built there. The idea of that you could have a 3-story building with multiple units in it doesn't seem very realistic to me. And so,
Well, if you have a 40B, they can do whatever they want.
yes, but if this is an MBTA overlay district, then our bylaws are what?
Right, but if you're too
Exactly.
restrictive,
Exactly, Kay.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's
do you mean?
theoretical.
right,
Yes, theoretical, but it's from a PR perspective, if you start drawing 3-story buildings,
We wouldn't.
You wouldn't.
Yeah, we wouldn't.
okay, good.
I mean, again, I
Draw to the
calculated,
density we want.
yeah, I
Right.
calculated Junction at 2 stories and
Right.
it worked. So, you know, if you approved a townhouse community of 2 stories, you know, and you think that can work environmentally on the site, like, I think it's a relatively low bar that we have to hit to make Junction work. So I just need to understand from you what that comfort level is. And then we can build around it. And I will say, I apologize, I do need to hop off soon. So I just wanted to give you a heads up if there's anything else you wanted to reach a conclusion on today.
right,
So
so
given that, may I make, or Robert, do you want to make a proposal? I have one I could make as well.
the proposal I was gonna make was for a small group of us to work with Jeff on the parameters for Junction Street.
That was going to be my
And-
proposal.
Okay,
The planning board's given a lot of thought to this, and we've worked on
Right.
some of the things, and I would suggest that Jasmine and Jody take the lead on that. And come back with something that meets the law and meets the aesthetic of what Dover would like to see. And I bring up
Right.
County Court as an example. And
Right.
quite frankly, that Dover Farms as well.
Yeah, I would say we want to think about aesthetic, but not be too prescriptive on that. Like,
I
you know what I
completely
mean? Like, we
agree.
want to think about what we allow, but not try to imagine it for people.
And remember as well that whatever you allow has to be allowed by right. So if we're talking about design, they need to be yes or no and not subjective.
Meaning like 2-story.
2-story, and you know, like if you wanted to have specific design standards for, you know, height of the roof and slope, and you know, it has to be very technical. I can go down and check. Yes, they did this,
Right.
as
Yes, they
opposed
did it.
to,
Yes,
does
they
this meet the community character? Does this, you know, anything that's subjective and more design guideliney is not considered by right. So we have to take that into consideration as well.
So
My
Jody,
only
I think
pet peeve
about
of
the work
parking
that
lot-
we've done for the village center.
Center. Right, we did all that visioning work, so we kind of have a
Exactly.
sense for what people are interested in seeing, at least in the center, and we could apply that.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
Yep.
All right, so I think I think the planning board will work with Jeff. Mike, I believe the Board of Selectmen gave the planning board authority to work on this. Does this have to go to a Board of Selectmen vote? Do we know?
I mean, this is part of the same project that the Board of
Right.
Selectmen already authorized.
Right,
It's just,
excellent,
Right.
all right. I can
Mhm.
just give an update then, that sounds great.
So Jeff, if we were to get working on this, what would be what do you imagine is a reasonable time frame to allow for this next step?
I mean, as long as you've gotten permission from MHP to extend the deadline, I would say for your purposes, you should be planning on, unless you schedule a special town meeting, to have this by spring of next year, at the latest, so that if anything goes wrong, you have fall town meeting or can schedule. I don't know if you have fall town meeting actually, but that you would have the opportunity to schedule something special in the fall.
I was thinking, sorry, more about this immediate next step with you.
Okay.
Going back and starting to put some pencil to the paper on what we might do at Junction Street would just, I'm going to throw out, like, is 8 weeks a reasonable amount of time to imagine we could come back to this group with some scaffolding of a bylaw?
I would hope so. That certainly works for me. Again,
How's
we
that?
just, yeah, that works for me.
Carol, what do you think about that timeline?
I think.
A lot going on. I mean,
If-
there's town
if
meeting,
we
there's
could-
everything's
if we
doing a
could do
lot.
some, yeah, if we could do something before the summer, so whether it's late May or sometime in, before by mid-June, let's say, right?
Yeah, let's
To get
put it that way,
everybody
maybe.
together for that.
Yeah, and we come back and we have, again, like, not gonna have every detail fleshed out, but like, how does everybody, like a touch base? Yeah. Does that seem
Yeah, that's totally reasonable for me.
okay, Jasmine?
That sounds great.
Well, I also think it works. I mean, we've looked at what we have a couple things going on at town meeting. Once town meeting is over, Jasmine and I have talked about, what's still on the plate after town meeting, and housing is and all the aspects of housing, the website, these next steps are really
Education.
our first priority, other than whatever applications come in. So I think the timing probably would work out well.
Right, and I would say compliance with the MBTA Communities Act is very important for the town, for us to present to town meeting. Because the ramifications of not being compliant financially are huge.
Yeah.
And people and citizens need to understand that.
And we have to work assuming that the law as we know it is going to remain.
Right. Right.
The
We
Chief
are,
Justice of the
right.
Land Court yesterday, reminded us that at a COA presentation that the Milton case isn't going to court until October.
Oh, interesting.
So that by the time they go through the whole process and so forth, it's not only after fall town meeting schedule for all these towns that have to do something by December of 2024.
Right.
So we're not going to know for a while, but we have Jeff on board here, so we might as well proceed.
Right. And we can always change things, but at least we have a plan, and we also know right now the governor's position as well. So I think it's very scary not being compliant.
If I just ask, I'm a little confused. So I understand our deadline is December of next year. Is our intention to wait till a fall town meeting, or is there a possibility we do this next May?
I thought it was, we were aiming for next May.
Okay.
That's what
I would
have.
advise you to do spring if you can, in case anything goes wrong.
Agreed. I think that makes
I
sense.
was thinking that too, because at least we can fix it.
Right.
And also to the point Jeff made earlier, I mean, we've all attended some of these webinars that have been put on by the state. And they've always made it clear that it's HL, whatever the organization is that has said, it may take us 60 or 90 days.
Right.
We would love the opportunity to have you, bring in a preliminary plan so we can take a look at it and give you our thoughts.
Right.
So if we would have our job done by the time we get done with all the stuff by fall of 2024, right, and get it into the state at that point. If
And
they
begin
come
to
back and say they're
educate.
problematic, it still gives us time before a May of 2025 town
Yeah.
meeting to adjust
Yeah.
it accordingly.
Our preliminary
Exactly.
timeline we developed was the first draft by July 31st, town staff input, and get it to Nina, early September, so that we can then get it. I don't know if we go to Nina first or to the state, probably Nina.
Right.
Yep.
And then we would have a working draft, a public draft complete, you know, and then we'd start a lot of education. We can do education beforehand, but.
Right. And maybe then, you know, we'll have a better idea of maybe things will change, maybe there'll be decisions made on certain applications that will help us as we navigate.
With that, I do have to hop off. I
Okay.
will
Well,
connect with
much
Jasmine
appreciated.
and we'll move forward.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
Thank
Jeff.
you, Jeff.
Thanks,
Thank
Jeff.
you.
Thank you.
Talk soon.
All right, and everybody else, I basically have 2 more minutes, but the other thing I wanted to talk about was the Housing Task Force presentation or warrant article at town meeting. So, you know, do we want that to be a joint presentation between the planning board and board of selectmen as representatives of the task force? And the most important thing is understanding how much money we're actually asking for.
So I thought the presentation that was put together
Is
and
good.
this at the open hearing was good. And your presentation of it, Robin, was good.
I was exhausted and I
know
felt
jet
like I
lagged, but it
had
didn't show
a
until maybe when you left.
lot of pressure because everybody said what a great job Jody did.
Yeah. I would like this to be a selectmen's thing. The budget's going to be there. You're working on the RFP. Jody and Jasmine can certainly be there for any detailed planning and zoning type questions that might come up.
That's perfectly fine with me as long as there's support to answer,
Absolutely.
you know, the questions. So,
For sure.
all right.
So I know that there had been some email streams around about adding a couple of backup slides to the presentation based upon the questions at the open hearing. So
Well, there
Jasmine,
weren't any questions at the open hearing. There
well,
were
maybe
questions at the warrant committee.
oh, maybe it was the warrant committee meeting.
Right.
Where were the warrant committee?
Yeah, there
meeting?
were questions
Right.
at the warrant committee
Right.
meeting because
Yeah, they had a lot of
Jasmine
questions.
had put together a cheat sheet for me in case people asked me about the MBTA Communities Act, so that I had,
But the kind of
so
questions
I
that came
looked
up at the warrant
really
committee are-
knowledgeable.
Yeah, but the questions that came up at warrant committee are going to be the kinds of questions that we're going to hear over and over and over again, and they make sense. Like they're really good questions because this is confusing. And I would assume that the warrant committee is kind of not as up to date as we all are on MBTA. So they were good questions, and I'm glad. Thank you, Jasmine, for compiling them.
Oh, absolutely.
So maybe Jasmine, if you could send out the next week or two the new deck with those backup slides, and we could take one more look at it. From the viewpoint of no one knows anything and do we have the information? Because it's always helpful to have a backup slide to the questions we
Right.
know are going to get asked.
Absolutely. Can certainly
So
do that.
actually, I was at the warrant committee's meeting on Monday night and they were going over the Blue Book write-up. And I had some comments, but as we sit in this meeting, probably a good idea to have them send it to, should I have them send it maybe to Jody? Or from the planning board perspective, you know, what I had them add was, trying to blend the rural character of the town with diversified housing needs. But I was surprised they did a good job. So let me have them send it out. I can send it to everybody here and just get feedback.
Do we have any responses yet on the to the RFP?
I don't know.
Do we have any better sense of cost?
So I've been communicating with Judy Barrett. I sent her the presentation, so she has a set, we've talked it through, but so she can see what we're talking about. Her email back is she's actually out of the office until next week. So I won't be able to connect with her until then.
Okay.
But we'll certainly have it prior to town meeting. well in advance of town meeting.
Good. All right, so then we have a plan. I'll make the presentation. Jasmine's gonna make me sound extremely knowledgeable by having, having backup slides with all the answers, so people will think I just am so
You're gonna be a pro.
knowledgeable on this, but, and then hopefully it would be great to get a price around 50 instead of 100. I think psychologically that would go a long way, but
Yep.
it is what it is.
Well,
And,
I was pleased to
and-
hear that Jeff seemed to feel that he had that the extension of the contract and where we are with it from time and dollars would still give him the flexibility to meet the needs that we've got in our next step.
Right, right. So that's great.
Yep.
And I think I would be remiss without thanking Chris for making this presentation look so good.
It was a beauty.
Nice one.
Thanks. Happy to help.
Oh, we very much appreciate it. So. All right, and next month I'll try to get the agenda out earlier.
Do we have a date? Is that already on our calendars?
Yeah, Mona sent out a recurring.
Oh,
The
great.
last
So-
Wednesday, right?
Oh,
At
okay.
Yeah,
2:30 usually.
We didn't send it out, so we sent one just for this meeting because it was
Okay.
earlier than usual. So we will now send out the reoccurring because I
Okay.
think it's at 3 o'clock.
Right, it's at 3
Yeah.
o'clock because we did
Yeah,
this
we
one
moved this
early.
one earlier just to accommodate Jeff.
So that'll be April 24th. The third Wednesday.
Yeah, it's
That would be
supposed to
the fourth. That's
last
the fourth
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
I think we had said it was the last Wednesday of the month.
Or the last Wednesday?
Oh, then that's the
Yes.
24th.
So it is the 24th. Yeah.
Oh, it is, okay. Well, that works out well because we can fine tune anything in preparation for town meeting.
Exactly,
Yep.
right, perfect. Well, it was planned that way.
Yes. This group is genius.
We are so good. We're a team.
Okay,
All right, thank you, everyone.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.